The biggest announcement in this year's budget was a major reform to pensions that will let people take out their whole pension pots in cash. Today, the government's announced more details about how all of this is going to work. With me to explain is Jonathan Eley, Head of FT Money. Thanks for joining us. So what have we actually learnt today?
Three big points of detail today. One is that the government has announced restrictions on how much you can put into another pension pot once you have taken benefits from an existing one. And that's to stop people taking their 25% tax-free cash or more cash on top of that and then sticking it straight into another pension scheme and getting tax relief on those contributions.
Obvious loophole to close that one.
Yes, absolutely. The second is that they've said that people who are in the private sector and are in a very valuable final salary scheme will be allowed, subject to some restrictions, to take their money out of a final salary scheme and put it into what's called a money purchase or defined contribution scheme so that they can get access to the money they've saved.
Will anyone actually do that, do you think?
In most cases, it's not a good idea because final salary schemes are very valuable, dying out now in the private sector. But for some people that option will make sense. For instance, if you've got sort of limited life expectancy and you don't expect to live long enough to see all the benefits of a final salary scheme, it can make sense to do that. And the third, and perhaps the most important thing, is that they have clarified who is going to provide and who is going to pay for this guidance that George Osborne promised back in March. He famously said in the House of Commons that everybody would receive free, impartial advice at retirement.
I remember that, and people thought, oh, that sounds expensive, giving one-to-one advice to how many pensioners will this affect?
Well, between 300,000 and 400,000 people buy an annuity currently every year, so that gives you a rough guide to the number of people who might be eligible for this advice, except that it's not going to be advice, it's going to be guidance.
What's the difference?
Advice is where you are given specific direction on what to do. Guidance is where you are given rather more general advice about what might be the best option for you, but crucially it doesn't end in a product recommendation. Okay. So what the government has said today is that the insurance industry and the pensions industry will not be able to provide that advice because most consumers said they wouldn't trust the industry to do it, and that's perhaps not surprising given its long and unillustrious record of mis-selling. Instead, the guidance will be provided by two organisations, the Pensions Advice Service, TPAS, and the Money Advice Service, or MAS. And they are both sort of part funded by the government already, and there will be a levy on the whole of the financial service industry to meet the cost of providing that guidance, which will be provided through a variety of channels, we're told, including web-based, telephone-based and face-to-face.
How expensive is it going to be, do we know?
Well, the estimates vary widely. Some people say north of £100 million a year. Some people say perhaps £1 or £2 million a year. TPAS in the past, I think, has put a figure of about £8 million on their bit of it. So the estimates are very widely, but a lot of it will depend on how people take the advice.
But it's not going to bankrupt the pensions industry from the sounds of it?
Certainly not, no.
And so the idea of this presumably is that lots of people said when this announcement was made, lots of people liked it, but people said, well, surely the risk is that people will be terribly irresponsible or they will be kind of missold terrible products and then they will end up impoverished in their old age and the state will end up picking up the tab. Is the idea of this guidance that we'll somehow kind of mitigate that risk by making sure people do sensible things?
Very much so. So the two main criticisms of a lot of people do support this legislation, the freedom and choice in pensions. They say it's much better that people are given control. It's their money after all. But yes, there are two big criticisms. One is that, that this is nothing to do with freedom and choice in pensions. It's all to do with bringing forward tax revenue. And there's a lovely chart in the budget documents that shows just how much the Treasury expects to make from this in the early years especially. And the second was, as you say, that people will think, oh great, I can get at my money now, I only need to pay a small tax charge to take out bits of my pension scheme and go and spend it on what I like. And that people would sort of underestimate how long they are likely to live, take all their money out, blow it on cruises and sports cars and whatever else, and then end up being a ward of the state. And that is the main criticism. And the idea of the guidance is that people will sit down at retirement and have a good think about their whole financial picture, whether they still have mortgages to pay off, whether they have medical conditions, whether they're likely to need social care in later life, and take an informed decision about what to do with that money rather than going and blowing it all. And just to be clear, for some people an annuity might still make sense.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jonathan, for joining us. And if you want to read any more about these details, then go to ft.com/money.